Good afternoon. Today we will study about the statement. The declarative intention of the speaker is stated with the punctuation mark. The speaker who states the clause in the imperative situation states the imperative clause whose subject are determined as the listeners. The speaker who intends to convey the exclamative intention state the exclamative clause. The exclamative clause is stated with the punctuation mark. The speaker who quotes a statement of others, the sentence in the two ways, the direct quotation or the indirect quotation. From now on, we will study about the imperative clause first. There is another title on the main title, the imperative clause, a modal verb as one of the adverbs. In the imperative clause, the speaker states the clause in the imperative situation. So the speaker conveys the instructive intention to beseech the listeners to actualize an experience, a condition, or an action described by the verb. When the speaker states the imperative clause to beseech the listeners not to actualize the definition of the verb, applies the modal verb do or does. The modal verb do or does is applied the emphasis of the speaker on the definition of the verb. In the declarative clause, the modal verb do or does in the imperative clause is applied to convey the assumption of the speaker, because the listeners who are the subject of the imperative clause are not yet to actualize the definition of the verb. So the modal verb do or does is applied to that the modal verb do or does is applied in does not the present when the speaker states the imperative clause. So we can say that the modal verb do or does is applied to convey the assumption of the speaker, also conveys the emphasis of the speaker, that is of the modal verb do or does. From now on, we will study about the definition of the imperative clause. The speaker states the imperative clause with the abbreviation of the listeners as the subject to convey the imperative intention to beseech the listeners to actualize the experience, condition, or action indicated by the definition of the verb. The role of the imperative clause is this. The imperative clause to state an experience, a condition, or an action that the listeners as the subject will actualize is able to be considered to convey the assumed intention of the speaker who describes the experience, condition, or action that is yet to be actualized. So we can understand that the modal verb do or does is applied to convey the assuming intention of the speaker. There is an imperative clause. Do not be sad. The speaker describes the predicate. That consists of the be-verb be and the adjective sad, with the modal verb do and the adverb not. To specify the definition of the general verb in the opposite way, the modal verb do and the adverb not are applied to describe a general verb in the clause. The be-verb in the other third of the statement is described by the adverb not in a direct way, like this. The adverb not directly describes the definition of the be-verb. Because the be-verb contains the trait as an adverb, so the definition of the be-verb is changed with the trait as an adverb. The be-verb describes the existence of the subject primarily, and the be-verb describes the condition of the subject with the trait of an adverb. The adverb not directly describes the be-verb, so that the be-verb describes the condition of the subject. For example, the subject of this clause, the listeners, are in the condition except the condition described by the adjective sad. The listeners can be happy, the listeners can be joyful, the listeners can be peaceful. The condition that the listeners are in described by any condition except the condition described by the adjective sad. So we can take a look at the application of the modal verb do applied to specify the definition of the be-verb. Let's consider the order of the statement spoken by the speaker. The speaker abbreviates the subject, who are the listeners, but the speaker and the listeners understand that the abbreviation of the subject for the listeners is sure to be accepted in the imperative situation. So the speaker and the listeners admit the existence of the listeners who are the subject. And the statement of the phrase of the modal verb do not ahead of the be-verb to describe the existence of the subject for the listeners at first is stated in the opposite way. The speaker conveys the intention for the subject not to exist in the condition described by the predicate be said. The speaker reveals the intention to beseech the listeners not to proceed and exist with the assumed condition indicated by the predicate be said. The speaker intends the listeners in the future not to be in the condition described by the predicate be said. The speaker applies the modal verb do as an adverb to emphasize the definition of the verb. The definition of the verb emphasized by the modal verb do with a specification by the adverb dot is stated to convey the opposite intention that the definition of the verb conveys originally. The adverb not specifies the description of the modal verb do to emphasize the definition of the verb. The speaker considers the existence of the listeners as a premise because the speaker who states the imperative clause applies the phrase of the modal verb do not ahead of the be-verb to describe the existence of the listeners primarily. Because this clause conveys the assumption of the speaker and the listeners can accept the fact that the speaker perceives the present condition is able to be stated by the predicate be said. The speaker acknowledges that the listeners are in the condition stated by the predicate be said at the present. The listeners are conveyed the intention of the speaker who beseeches the listeners not to exist in the condition indicated by the predicate be said. So we can consider the unit of the statement with the phrase of the modal verb do not and the predicate be said. The speaker applies the phrase of the modal verb do not to deny the condition described by the predicate be said. In the imperative clause, to convey the intention of the speaker who beseeches the listeners not to exist in the condition described by the predicate be said, even though the listeners already exist in the condition. The modal verb do is interpreted to convey the assuming intention of the speaker. this description is about the order of the statement between the phrase of the modal verb do not and the predicate be said. The phrase of the modal verb do not is stated ahead of the predicate be said. We can understand that the speaker accepts that the listeners exist because the speaker already states this imperative clause to the listeners. That is the premise. And the speaker states the phrase of the modal verb and then the speaker states the predicate be said. This can mean that the speaker denies the existence of the listeners, the exact condition described by the adjective said. So the speaker the other condition, the speaker beseeches the listeners to exist in the other condition.